We've got a lot of echo here. Could you please ensure that your phone is switched off or in airplane mode? Can I also remind anyone in the public gallery that at this stage it's not permissible to bring in, there's no one here, with electronic devices. And can I remind you to declare your interests as appropriate throughout the meeting? Thank you. Apologies, I have Maeve McLaughlin, Pat Sheehan and Jonathan Craig. Any others? Chair, Mervyn. Okay, yes. Mervyn. Anyone else? No, Joanne's here. Very welcome. Okay, so if I can move on to Chairperson's business. Firstly, GL assessment. Members, yesterday morning, the Chair of the Committee met with representatives from the GL Education Group, along with the Chairperson of the Committee for Employment and Learning, and actually they came and met with me later in the morning as well, which was very useful. I propose that we write to the Department of Education, SEA and ETI, seeking an update on the next steps for CBA and asking if they've had any engagement with GL assessment in respect of the use of PI and PIM. I also suggest we request case study information for schools which have used the suite of GL products. I was intrigued, it was something like 91% and 95% of, I can't remember which different types of schools use their products, which is enormous. So I was keen that we could see. They also mentioned PASS at the lunchtime meeting and CAT.
Yes.
If there's a chance of just seeing, I don't know if you all want to actually see what they look like. You probably know, John, don't you? So,
CATs and PASS, yeah.
Okay. Are we agreed that we write? Yeah. Okay. Antrim Grammar, and I think you'll agree that we had a very useful meeting at Antrim Grammar School yesterday, and I'd like to express my thanks to the Principal, Stephen Black, and all the team there and his colleagues for facilitating our visit and informing us about the role of self-evaluation within the school improvement process. The school has asked us to treat the written information provided as confidential. If members wish to view or obtain a copy, they should contact the clerk. Sean.
Chair's comments. It really shows you how complex school self-evaluation is. But I think the things we have to, Stephen and his leadership team are key to driving self-evaluation, and creating that culture, as he said, takes quite a long time. So, congratulations to all.
I thought it was fantastic. What really, though, ran through my mind is how on earth do schools that can't afford it or are too small, how do we get it to work through them? And I thought that's where we should be looking, as to how do we use their example of how they do it and pass it all the way through the system.
I think, but the biggest thing is actually building into the school. It's very easy. Chris asked the question about young teachers, so newly qualified teachers, and that it's very easy. They're well used to classroom observation, but if you have a teacher, if there's not a process already established in the school of classroom observation, it's quite challenging to get your older teachers to come on stream.
Well, thank you. Okay. The draft minutes of the 26th of February 2014 are in your pack, pages 6 to 11. Are there any comments on the draft minutes? Okay, they agreed. Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
George, I just ask you.
Yeah.
Have we sent a letter to the, I don't know what it's titled, it's the principal of St Mary's and the principal of the school who attended?
Which attended which?
The West Belfast Partnership Board.
We wrote to the West Belfast Partnership Board. Actually, I think that thanked them for the visit.
St Mary's as well, I think.
Did we actually write to St Mary's? Oh, so St Mary's University College. Yes, we also wrote to Professor. Yes, did that.
Okay, so we've done that. Thank you. Okay, matters arising. Members, at page 13 to 22, you'll find further correspondence from the Education and Training Inspectorate relating to our inquiry. This includes copies of letters from schools that have recently been inspected, complementing the work of the ETI. I suggest we note the correspondence for now and add it to our webpage. Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, if we move on then to the inquiry into the Education and Training Inspectorate and School Improvement Process for a non-departmental briefing. Members, we now move to a briefing with Professor John Gardner, Deputy Principal from the University of Stirling. The clerk's cover note is at pages 24 to 25, and at pages 26 to 29 you'll find a submission from Professor Gardner.
He is going to come in any minute now. There he is.
Very good. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you very much.
Just put this stuff here, okay?
Please do. Yeah, make yourself comfortable. You're very, very welcome to our meeting today, and we look forward to hearing what you say, and also very grateful for the submission you put in. You've got 10 minutes, please, to brief the committee.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a while since I did any direct research on school inspections, but I keep my hand in terms of reading and the general aspects of the field. So I hope I can contribute something to the deliberations of the committee, but I leave that to you to decide. If I may, what I'll do is just structure it in terms of the terms of reference, just a brief 10 minutes, and I just want to refer to those more directly. I think just to summarise them, the terms of reference are first of all about the effectiveness of the ETI's current approach to actually create improvement or to contribute to improvement, and the issue of what value is added to schools that are possibly at the lower end of their student attainment profiles. The second was about identifying key issues impacting on schools like that, and any gaps in the kind of provision for them, either from an ETI review process perspective or from the perspective of the department and the ELBs. And the third was the models of good practice elsewhere. And the fourth, the priorities and actions to improve ETI and their approach. So I'd like to just start off by saying I think that from my perspective, which is more academic and more related to the research end of it, more to the knowledge of what actually happens, the evidence, if you like, it's not possible to draw any direct relationship between the inspection process and any improvement in schools. That's a step too far. However, it's and that's because these improvements, or indeed the decline of schools, are subject to so many influences that picking out one isn't appropriate, isn't sensible. But it is clear from what we know that, and I think it's common sense too, if somebody actually talks to us about our own performance in something, that generally speaking has an effect of making us reflect on what we're doing. And it's up to us then about whether we improve or even accept the advice. So in the terms of schools, I think it's pretty clear that without this kind of independent, objective and external input, they would have to rely more or less on their own devices or on the devices of other provisions which might come from, for example, the library boards or indeed from some other arm of the department. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing is that this particular term of reference related to low attainment in schools or lower attaining schools. And I think I'd just like to point out that attainment wouldn't be the only objective that should be considered for a school. There is a wider range of objectives, and when an inspection team would go into a high-performing school, I would suggest that there is always room for improvement in other dimensions of what they provide. Sometimes the very best of schools in attainment are very limited in other areas of the preparation of young people for life after school. And the second issue then, these schools of lower attainment and the kinds of issues impacting on them, I would suggest that the literature and experience, perhaps even of us here, certainly that's my experience, but more of a public experience, not just in the research literature, is that leadership's a key factor in schools. And if you have a school that is attaining at low levels for its pupils, or its pupils are attaining at low levels, sometimes you'll find that the school up the road with broadly the same kind of catchment is actually doing much better. And that kind of thing makes you question the reasons for one being better than the other. It sometimes comes down to the organisational aspects of the school and the quality of teaching in the school, and very often the quality of leadership in the school. So that's one thing I would say. Resources is the most bandied of the issues impacting on schools, with very often the cry directly from principals, heads of schools, that they don't have the resources to deal with the problems they have. And that is, it's very easy to say that, and it may well be true in many cases that we're always constrained by the level of resources that we have for anything we do. But I would suggest that that is less of an issue than actually being more positive and approaching the problems and challenges by making the best of the resources that are available. I know that well-endowed schools will often complain about the level of resource available to schools that are that have lower attainment outputs, and that creates a little bit of tension in the system, because obviously they are managing with a lower unit of resource. Having said that, I don't think there's any doubt that the unit of resource for schools in low attainment situations is clearly linked to a level of resource. I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying that we can use them better. But one of the resources that I think does need to be looked at, and I'm a bit of a broken record in this one, and that is the level of staffing in schools. There isn't the space in schools that have these kind of challenges to allow the staff to really get together and try and sort out problems internally. The pressure of 9 to half 3 is just such that there's no time for reflection. There's very, very difficult in the longer term of the year to develop a strategic and even tactical responses to the challenges they have. And the other area I would say is that schools do need to improve is the community engagement. Now, there are lots of examples of schools doing this really well. I just would suggest that it needs to be done on a much more comprehensive basis. When you look at successful schools around the world, you'll find that they're really well integrated into their communities. And of course here, if somebody tries to close a school for whatever reason, usually for the number of students it's taking in, then you will get suddenly the kind of community reaction that isn't there in the more developmental aspects of the school or in the more challenging aspects of the school. It's only there in crisis. And I think there has to be a lot more done to develop that community pressure, that community engagement in the day-to-day of school running. In relation to ETI, I think there is a weakness in some aspects of the inspection process where certainly schools perceive that the ETI spend too much time looking at the data on attainment and somehow or other making judgments on that. I know from my dealings with the inspectorate that it's much more complex than that, but it's perceived that way, that very often the the inspectors don't take into account the type of catchment, the level of intake performance of the pupils at the school. And I think that is something that I think the inspectorate would need to spend a great deal of time convincing schools that it is a broad view they take of the attainment profiles. Having said that, there is this move, and it still continues, to use value-added measures, which are seriously flawed and can be seen to be flawed all over the world, particularly the United States, where the behaviours that are created in schools by the value-added motif means that all kinds of students are dislocated from the main enterprise of the school, which changes to focusing on how we can maintain our resource base from the government. In the United States, of course, there is money withdrawn from schools if they're not performing at a particular level. So there is a much greater pressure to create that value added and to evidence it. But I think that the issue in Northern Ireland, and there is a bit of a dog wagging the tail here in the English context of value added. If we introduce value added in a significant way, we will have a reaction in terms of school behaviours, which I don't believe would be to the benefit of Northern Ireland. It does have to be considered, of course, but it's not a measure that I would place sanctions on a school for unless it was handled very, very carefully. The next one would be the international perspectives. I think I'd like to argue that our inspection process is more or less in tune with what you would expect in the European context, and I've quoted some aspects of it there for the Netherlands and Sweden, Scotland, England, Ireland, Austria, the Czech Republic. We all do more or less the same thing. We do it all on a cyclical basis. We visit all schools, and we do it in terms of either value for money, the government spending this kind of money, are we getting value for it? But primarily for whether or not the schools are doing a good job. And I'd say all of those inspectorates do the same thing. They define what a good school is, and that's a collective thing. It's not just the inspectorate saying that, it's a society issue. And they define what the statutory requirements are. That's a government issue. And then the inspection team go in to see if, in fact, that's what the schools are doing. They do this through a cycle of visits, some of them thematic, some of them whole school, some of them based on risk. In other words, if a school has been identified as having problems, they would choose that school within the cycle to do that. But the key issue is the distinction between that kind of audit or role and a developmental role. And I think in Northern Ireland we have a reputation for emphasising the latter, which is the developmental role. Sometimes that swings backwards and forwards with people complaining the schools, the inspectorate are too audit related, and sometimes maybe you might even get complaints that they're not doing enough of the auditing and they're too developmental. But I think, just to put my own view, and that is that the best thing about an inspection is the kind of feedback it gives, the areas of weakness and strengths that it identifies, and the notion of that expert input from the outside that helps the school to generate its own process. And then finally, if I may, it's about the improving the ETI approach. There's no alternative to the ETI concentrating unlimited resources, I might say, on making sure that their inspectors are sensitive to schools, because you can give the best advice in the world. If you give it in a manner which the schools find too authoritative, nasty, whatever it might be, it just kills that benefit. I know most of the inspectors I've worked with don't do that, but there's horror stories all the time. So I think they have to keep working at that. The second thing is that I don't believe that the whole notion of an announced inspection is of any worth whatsoever. I actually think that if you were running a cafe at the bottom of the street and the health inspectors told you they were going to inspect you in 3 weeks' time, what does that tell us? So I actually think that inspections do need to be unannounced. I think it'll benefit schools by reducing the whole stress of preparing for one. and I think it will actually give an authentic picture of the experience of students in that school. I do think there's work needing to be done on how feedback is given to parents and pupils, and I think there's a lot can be done using the social media techniques that are around today. I think that feedback does have to be published in plain English and without the codes that have grown up within the institutions and particularly Inspectorate, where words are a little bit devious in terms of what they're trying to convey, instead of saying directly that there's a weakness in this, or I mean more direct, plain English. And I also think that when a school is being inspected, the community should know who that inspection team is, what their competence is, what their experience is, and that should be built into the fabric of the process so that the public is confident there's people going in there who know what they're doing and can give good advice. So I've probably gone over 10 minutes, but
Very good, Professor Gallagher. Thank you. Thank you very much. And very thorough. I've got numerous questions, and I'm sure others have. You started at the beginning, or rather depressing point in your saying it actually there's insufficient evidence to really show improvement. When you were talking about the countries like Netherlands and others, is there anything different that they're doing that does show improvement? I mean, there must be different ways of getting a general idea.
Yeah, I think I have to say that's a very technical research point that I'm making there, that you can't get the causal relationship. You can get the associations, and you can get the even the common sense dimensions of it, which is if somebody goes in and questions a particular activity, well, it causes the people to reflect on it and hopefully improve on it. But the actual causal relationship between this inspection and this level of improvement is, I would rule it out. In any of those countries, it would be ruled out, and it's certainly ruled out here, because the teaching could improve, the leadership could change or improve, the parental engagement could improve, all sorts of, I mean, there is a myriad factors that would actually contribute to the improvement, which, if you like, the inspection could only be associated with the stimulation of, not doing it. So it's a technical point.
Thank you. And also then on resources, which is what we have always raised with us, and you talked about the need for, on the levels of staffing, so of space and needing more time. And the one thing we see all the way through all the schools is the constant pressure, and part of it is the resources of money. They are very limited in whether they can employ new teachers, classes, assistants and others. And I just get the impression wherever we're going to schools are all being squeezed so tightly that resources do become the absolute key issue, and it's trying to get more into them. Because I get a mixed message from you. One is resources aren't the key, just pure money, but at the same time it does give us all the flexibility that allows a school.
I have to say that, well, Northern Ireland is particular in some of its problems, in the sense that we are doubling up on the school system in many ways, that we have two different school systems serving the same population. But actually, I've been a resource manager in my roles for a long time, and it's never as simple as we need more resources or we need better resources. It's actually about how you use them. A particular flaw in schooling in the UK is that we don't really have the models that have grown up elsewhere. And I'm looking at China or the United States, which is that the management of a school in terms of its resources, its administration and so on, is by one person, a particular type of person, and the academic activities of the school are handled by someone who is from the teaching side of things. So you have various names for them, but I've stood in schools in Cuba where it was the Communist Party person who was running the school, and the head of the school was a teacher, who was doing the academic, who never saw anything about resources. I'm not suggesting that's a good way or a good model, but around the world there is this distinction between how the resources are used and how they are brought into the school. versus the academic endeavour. If head teachers in Northern Ireland were concentrating solely on the academic improvement of the pupils, I think that would make a considerable difference to the way some schools are able to perform. It's not. There's no magic bullet on that one. I don't think we could introduce these school managers tomorrow. But I've seen the effect in the university sector, where the previous notions of a department head or a head of an academic school would be an academic, and rarely have they any competence whatsoever in how to manage resources or budgets. Or they can learn to do it, but it diverts them from their real or their more obvious activity.
No, thank you. No, whenever we go, certainly the principals and many others seem to be working all hours of the day past the 3:30, and up just to manage the scant resources that they've got, so they can do the leadership and things going.
And leadership gets squeezed into the weekend somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
No, thank you, Joanne.
Thank you, Chair, and can I also thank you for your briefing. You certainly raised the question of whether the process of inspection actually causes improvement in schools, and we certainly know in this committee that's certainly a wide topic. The Chair touched on my first question, and I know you sort of went into it in a bit of detail. I was going to ask about, are you aware of the work that has been done either in the UK and abroad, and how inspection can directly cause improvements? And I think you have that sort of fairly well covered. You later say in your briefing that it's reasonable to argue that inspections can promote reflection and change in teaching approaches and the organisation and management of the school. How then, in your view, should change be affected following an inspection, and what approach should the inspector take?
Well, I think inspectors should follow up on any advice that they've given a school. That's these follow-on inspections that would be normal in most countries. And I think they are also risk-based, so there's a scale of issue that they've given advice on that will require either a fairly immediate return to the school or something that perhaps is given more time. I think the improvement of schools is squarely a school issue. It's the teachers, the managers of the school who can do the improving. There's nobody else can do the improving. And I think what needs to be done is some kind of support structure to do that. Now, in bygone days, the library boards would have done that in a significant way. I'm not entirely clear what the resources open to library boards are at the moment. But in bygone days, as I say, they would have sent in a team to help with a particular aspect of the curriculum, perhaps boys reading or health and safety or something like that. They would have had experts who would have spanned the school, the community of schools that they oversee. But I don't think it's for the inspector to do that. That definitely I would rule out. The inspectorate have much more of a role in just being that independent expert voice in advising what needs to be done or mandating it if it's an issue of legislative compliance. But it's how they do it is all about leadership. Then you take the report and you sit down with your team in a school and you say, we're the only ones can fix this. We've got to get on with it. So.
Towards the end of your briefing, you bring up the what do they know anyway attitude of some of the teaching profession towards inspection reports. And I was interested, you spoke about the community knowing who the inspectors are, and certainly that might alleviate that fear and that dread with the inspectorate. What steps do you feel then need to be taken to ensure that teachers and parents can understand the recommendations of inspectors, because it's very important that they know. It certainly would take away that fear if they know how they take forward those recommendations, if they fully are understanding of them. What do you think could be done from that aspect?
I think it depends on the recommendation. If there is if it's some complex, like poor engagement between the different subject areas within a secondary level school, that can be quite complex for a parent to understand because it's almost structural or organisational. But if it's something about the laboratories in a secondary school not being up to scratch in terms of resources or upkeep or modernisation or something like that, that's something that a parent can understand easily. So there's a range of things. I think that the inspections rarely get down to that sort of detail. They tend to talk in the generality of where improvements can be made. And I suppose I would argue that it's the plain English dimensions of that. What does it mean when they say something like this school has a good familial approach to the treatment of students, but is weak on curricular breadth? Well, you know, parents are just going to look at that and go, what does familial mean and what does curricular breadth mean? It needs to be unpicked much more in plain English so that the parents will know that in fact actually they look after the kids really well, but they're not giving them a good education. You know, so it has to be much more plain English.
Just finally, as a supplementary, you do suggest the reputation of the inspections is key to how the public interpret reports, and you have went into quite a lot of detail about that. So how would you suggest, or how do we convey this expertise from the inspectors to the public? What's the best way to do that? Is that school-led, or how do you feel that should be? Because the uncertainty is out there, and if the public were better informed, and as you did say, with the community knowing the inspectors, how do we get that detail out there? Well,
I think some of it may have to come. If I had my way, I would have unannounced inspections so you couldn't tell the public beforehand. But afterwards, the report would detail the competence, and I don't mean in great detail, just sufficient to give people the confidence that my school was visited by experts. And they are experts. It's undeniable. The whole process of creating an inspectorate of 60 people, just by virtue of that, is bringing in people with expertise and a great deal of experience. So it's that the reporting of the inspection certainly is something that can be improved. It is something that has to go through the schools, because I don't think the inspector would have the resource, or indeed it wouldn't be wise for them to directly communicate to parents. But it has to go through the schools. It has to be through whatever medium the schools use to communicate with parents, and it should be well set out so that here's the people who have done the inspection, here's the kind of competence they have, here's what they have said about us, and really that's the sort of thing I would recommend.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
John, thank you. Trevor.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think that you come from here, so you know, if I say it, you didn't miss and hit the wall, you know what I mean. It was very frank, and quite rightly so. I'm interested in your preference for unannounced inspections. Do you mean in all cases?
No, not in all cases. You can do a whole school inspection on a cycle, which is, I would do it a wee bit, well, actually, I was going to say differently. It depends on what country you're in and where it's been done, but schools are becoming very good at their own self-evaluation, old school self-evaluation. So really what you have is, if you take a sector that I'm working in all the time, we would prepare a self-evaluation of an area of work in the university, and then we'd send it out to the Quality Assurance Agency, and they would, QAA, they would come along with a team, and they would look to see if we were actually doing what we said we were doing in the evaluation. And that's a kind of an audit type approach, which is about, okay, you say you're doing this, and we're just going to have a look to see if you are. In the QAA context, it's very collegial and positive. It's about people from other universities and other expertise in the sector doing that. Similarly with schools, I believe that if you have the schools providing a report of what they do, then you could go along and see how well they're doing it. However, in terms of a cycle of unannounced inspections, I would keep it relatively random and risk-based, both. I would say that you would have a random selection of schools that are going to be visited, along with a risk list that have to be visited. And then this third group, which is whole school or thematic. If you want to know how sport's being done in schools, I think you want to dip in a systematic way about how it's going on.
Would it be fair to say that if a school hadn't performed particularly well on a pre-planned inspection, that the next inspection should perhaps be unannounced?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, definitely.
We had this with in the Public Accounts Committee with nursing home inspections, where at a time the cycle had to be announced, unannounced, announced, unannounced, and that couldn't be varied. So any nursing home that had an unannounced inspection knew that the next one was going to be announced, which I think has now changed because it wasn't regarded as being a very good system.
Definitely not.
No.
Yeah.
But
I think the issue of unannounced is getting an authentic picture of the ordinary day-to-day experience of the pupils. All the same features of an inspection, talking to the pupils, looking at their work, talking to teachers, talking to the principal, talking to, sometimes they're able to talk to parents in the schoolyard at the end of the day, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it has to be unannounced, in my view, if you're going to get a proper picture of it. I gave a relatively tongue-in-cheek version of one that came out of a London school, but there's always dimensions of that in Northern Ireland schools. I've been in many, many Northern Ireland schools, and unlike the inspectors, I wasn't announced because I was visiting students, so it was relatively unannounced, if you know what I mean. The students would have known, and the people with the students. But I saw all sorts of things that, I mean, if Danny decided to go to the local school and just look at the toilets without actually mentioning, that you were coming, you'd find that maybe in that school, I don't know where you're from, Danny, but maybe in that school they do as some schools do, which is they don't put any toilet rolls in them because the kids push them down the thing and they block them. But there'll be toilet rolls there if there's an announced inspection, and that's the distinction. I know it's a tongue-in-cheek one. But it's about taking that issue of preparation and getting everything absolutely right, putting the posters up, painting the walls, getting the toilet rolls in the toilets. It's that sort of thing. I know parents, and maybe some of you have had parents who have written to you and said, look, I have to get my child to come home at lunchtime to go to the toilet. I'm picking one, which is... But anyway.
I can remember when I was at primary school that some parents wouldn't allow their pupils to go into the toilets. So we're so gross, Be in trouble for that. The headmaster told us just yesterday, effectively, that he ran his self-evaluation and assessment programme as if they were going to be inspected the next day. And surely that's a good. That's a good approach to take.
It's an interesting issue, Trevor, because the work I did back in 1999 had this concept of Trojan horse, which was the head teachers and the senior management of the school use the prospect of an inspection, or indeed the announced date of an inspection, as the big stick, and we've got to change this because look who's coming. Instead of the actual leadership role, which is, I think we should change this, let's all talk about it and do it. So that kind of thing is, it's not unusual. It's not entirely negative, of course, but it is a little bit of a cheat, I think, in terms of how the school changes its own processes.
Just one short one, Chairman. We have the associate assessors here, as you know. What do you think of their role and their input and their value to the process?
I think they are valuable. I think it is a mechanism for extending the size of the team. How well it extends the expertise of the team, I'm not entirely sure. I think that does need to be looked at. The Ofsted have used this process for a very long time, and it is part of the deep unhappiness of schools that are in the Ofsted process, that they consider that some of the people who have come in either have baggage of some kind or another, some kind of vested interest, or they don't have the competence that they would expect HMI, when it existed, to have. So we, as I say, would expect our inspectors to have the competence, the professional expertise and experience. I'm not necessarily sure that the public would be confident of associate inspectors, even though most of them would actually be head teachers and things like that. It's just not part of the... I don't think the public really understands that role.
Well, the associate assessors themselves, I think it's fair to say, don't feel sufficiently valued in the process, and yet the inspectorate says that they value them very highly, and their input is taken on board, and so on. Somebody's wrong, you know. It sounds like a good augmentation of the system to me, that if for no other reason than it gives those head teachers, and they are normally head teachers, the experience of an inspection, which will be valuable to them when they come back to their own school.
There's lots of positive dimensions to it, but how valuably it's perceived does need to be looked at, because I think people see it as just a way to extend the team and not to extend the competence. It's that kind of humbug of the thing, that it's you can't get enough inspectors, so you just get somebody else from somewhere else, that kind of thing.
Okay, you've been fairly direct about your opinions about the inspectorate, so it's nearly said uncomplimentary.
I'm a fan of the inspector, I have to say. Or inspection, I should say.
You know the scale of that's used for the summing up of an inspector's report. It goes from excellent down to through good, through adequate, satisfactory, inadequate, unsatisfactory, and whatever's below that. I don't know, Baron Squad. Where would you place the inspectorate if you were having to assess them?
I think they're more than satisfactory, personally. I think they don't handle their outside perspective well. I don't think that may be about resource. It may even be about a kind of institutional arrogance, about we're top of the tree or whatever, and we don't need to explain who we are. But actually, in the context in which they're working, they do, and they do need to establish just how important their work is, and how expert they are, mostly. I would say all of them. In fact, I don't know of any weaknesses in the inspectorate team. But I have to say that they do need to work at their public image, possibly. You know, but I'd say more than satisfactory.
You would give them a satisfactory and a repeat inspection.
There are things here that I think that even they can't control. You know, so even if they did want to improve them. So.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Just before I bring you in, Sean, just intrigued, do we focus too much on maths and English in the schools in our inspection? Should we be looking at them in a broader way? Of history, because certainly district inspectors, one or two, said we don't seem to inspect on other subjects enough.
There's two ways to answer that, Danny. One is that we must focus on maths and English, and the other is the extent to which that kind of focus might preclude other important issues. I think the question you're asking is, do we do too much of it? Maybe in some circumstances we do. But there's no question in my mind that basic literacies and basic numeracies are the keystone to any kind of progress in future learning and in actually engaging in society properly. So I think the way it's engaged with is also problematic, about the way that, we've had diagnostic tests in Northern Ireland for some time, and I have looked at them in some depth and reported on them. They're not good. There's a change in this last couple of years, and I haven't looked at them, but the previous types that we had were not doing much good. And they were looking at mathematical and if you like, English literacy. And I think they were causing confusion in schools, and the inspectorate to some extent saw that confusion and reported it, but were also to some extent using the results to determine the advice to schools, perhaps in a little bit too much in comparison to other aspects of a school.
Sean.
Thanks, and you're very welcome. I've enjoyed your comments so far. Going back to your opening comments in terms of school inspections on the link with school improvement, and you talked about it really was a step too far to try and link. If you had a free hand, what would you say? What would you do to ensure that there was a positive correlation between school inspection and the ETI and school improvement?
I have to say, Sean, it is really, really complex. If an inspection happens in a school and the advice to the school is that there's serious weaknesses in the mathematics provision of the school, and the school then remedies that by providing extra training for the teachers or recruiting new teachers or whatever it is, the extent to which the inspection did that is limited. The inspection can only say that the mathematics education is weak for X, Y, and Z reasons, and we think you need to improve it, and here's some suggestions on how to do that. If there was a direct correlation between the suggestions the inspection made, the action taken by the school, and an improvement a year or two on, then you could start to draw very strong associations between the inspection and the improved outcome. And that's all about evidence gathering. To some extent, one of my points in here is that there really does need to be much more evidence of change initiated subsequent to an inspection, so that a more forensic approach could be taken into the dimensions of that inspection that worked their way through to the dimensions of improved outcome. And I think that that's very, very complex. It's not well done anywhere because there's so many variables in it. But if, for example, it was very specific, like if there was a recommendation that the way in which the mathematics education was developed for very precise reasons was wrong or not appropriate or not successful, and recommendations were made to change those aspects of it, and those aspects were then changed by the school, not by the inspectors, and then a follow-up inspection determined that these aspects had been improved, well, then you've got your link. But it's complex.
It is complex, and you understand the situation with just 60 inspectors in Northern Ireland and that type of thing. But just taking the Mans one, particularly one, taking that on further, do you believe that if there's a stronger link between the inspection team and the providers of staff development, that would help to improve that link between inspection and improvement?
It should be a collegial link, sharing experience and sharing the issues, certainly. A more formal link would begin to, I think, disturb the independence of the inspection and the inspectorate. It's the factories inspectorate no doubt go along to gatherings of the sorts of support associations for factory health and safety, and go and give and share their experience. But I would suspect that they have to maintain their independence from actually being part of it or directing any aspect of it. So I think there's an independence issue.
You mentioned value added as well, and you talked about value added in America, and you've said you wouldn't like to see value added going here the same way it's gone in America. Could maybe you elaborate a wee bit more on that?
The sorts of value-added systems that are around are they start with a baseline. They say that baseline could either be the school baseline, or it could be some kind of external baseline. In the United States, it might be a state baseline, it might be a federal baseline, it might be whatever it is. In England, there are baselines that are related to the school's previous performance. So it's about moving from there to there, and this is the value added. But of course, the big problem with that, if I can explain the complexity of it, it's difficult to explain. But let's say you're at that level, and this is the level that you might want a school to get to, then there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. If you're at that level, there's very, very little, comparatively speaking, room for improvement. And actually, the amount of improvement you make, if the value added is any way related, so that this little bit is, in one school is considered to be not as good as this big bit in another school, then you've got a wrong analysis, in my view. You've got a situation where one school can improve a lot, the other school can't improve a lot. It's a bit like examination marks. If I'm already scoring 90, to get to 95 is very, very hard. But if I'm scoring 60, I've got a lot of opportunity to get to 90. And it's that kind of difference where the value added is, in essence, still good, but it's where the comparisons come in. And the value added systems in the United States and to some extent in England are that, oh, you haven't improved much, your resources are going to be limited in this manner. Oh, you've improved a lot. This is how we're going to improve your resource base. And it's that kind of notion of rewarding performance on a rather simplistic basis that's problematic.
It's probably value added of the school rather than value added of the students.
It's the school profile that's generally used. As you know, well, you probably don't know, but in the United States there's lots of published work, and in England as well, lots of published work on the games that schools will play to keep particular groups of students out of the value-added calculations. They will be ill on the days that, or they'll be sent somewhere. I'm not saying that all schools do this by any means. I don't want to impugn schools, but there are games to be played when there are high stakes in relation to resources. And I'm afraid the nature of these things is that some schools, some leaders in schools will play those games. I wouldn't be able to say the proportion of it, but there's published work on it, which is if you apply this kind of process, it creates a different kind of behaviour, which loses sight of the actual activities of the school, which are to improve learning and to enable every student to reach their full potential. There are actually lots of students who are kept out of that for whatever reason. Some of them are exempted by lobbying. A school that has a particular proportion of transient students, for example, who might be part of a local army base, or here in Northern Ireland it might be a travellers community, or whatever it might be. There might be an argument to say, oh, well, hold on a minute, we can't actually count the whole basis of our group for this value added because they're in and out and all sorts of things. There's lots of reasons why it is not a particularly good system.
Thank you. Trevor, you wanted to come in quickly.
Yeah, just on the back of the value-added discussion. In your terms, the 60 level versus the 90, well, one of the main complaints about the inspectorate here is that if a school comes in into an inspection with a baseline of 60, and the next time they're inspected, they've got it up to, let's say, 70, which is a big improvement, but they don't get acknowledged in the inspection report for having made that improvement, because they haven't got to 90, in simple terms. And that's one of the... We had a headmaster in here recently who was absolutely distraught in those circumstances, that the improvement they had made over a 3-year period had not been acknowledged. And he'd actually got an unsatisfactory report. And he said he would have complained about a satisfactory report on the basis of what was said to him during the inspection. He was outraged.
I understand that. I think, and I would emphasise what I was saying earlier. This is all about sensitivity. It's just too easy to dismiss something which is actually, within the context that it happens, a very significant thing. And it's because the inspectors might have a view of where it should go to, and they don't acknowledge, in the example you're talking about, they don't acknowledge what has been achieved. That to me is a lack of sensitivity, a lack of common sense, a lack of developmental approach to the process.
Would you see that as a commonplace occurrence?
No, I don't. I think that if you know, when you read these inspection reports, you see a whole balance of things. To some extent, they're a little bit too like marshmallowy, you know, instead of going to the issues straight, and indeed going to the positive issues straight. It's all couched in coded stuff that I think a principal might say, but you haven't said clearly that we have done brilliantly in bringing up the mathematics or the reading of boys or whatever it might be. And I think that's because of that. It's presentation rather than intent.
Okay. Thank you.
Sean, had you finished?
Just one. Do you believe the district inspector is an important role?
I have to say, Sean, I'm not terribly au fait with the structures now. I've been out of the system for a few years, but the district inspector would presumably have charge of a district
particular area and would maybe visit schools often, not frequently. They're probably more of a pastoral role. Bit of a pastoral role. They know the context of the school.
That sort of call in, have a chat. I'll be there next week. That kind of thing is excellent. I mean, it's a way of being more collegial, more advisory, more developmental, which takes the audit dimension of it out. But having said that, there would be instances of, you know, and I am aware of them, of very rarely, but I am aware of them, of inappropriate. I'm here to have a chat about such and such. Do you mind if I just walk over to the football pitches and have a look at the classes? With the clear kind of, you know, because there's a problem with the sport facilities in a previous inspection. And that kind of thing has created some really incendiary situations with head teachers in the past and that I experienced. And that was supposed to be a call in, have a chat, and then, oh, I'm just going to pop over. Would you mind? How can you say no?
Thanks.
John, thanks very much. It's a very thought-provoking presentation indeed. I suppose coming into this, and we visited Scotland actually, and we were well impressed with Education Scotland, and I felt certainly that maybe we were concentrating on maybe trying to marry inspection with improvement, and that we were trying to maybe see more of a focus. We even thought of renaming the inspector to something to reflect that it's more about an improvement process rather than inspection. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I get the feeling you're saying, no, the two are distinct. That there's a need for a competent professional body who inspect and are experts, and that's what they're for. And that an improvement process is something linked but different, and that we should be careful of trying to marry the two. Am I right in taking you up?
Broadly, Chris, I think that there are these two dimensions of it, which are audit and development. Northern Ireland has a reputation over many years of being developmentally or on the balance development. I mean, we over the years that I've been involved, the number of schools that have gone into what you might call special measures has always been at the last resort because of processes that were trying to address it up to that point. And I would say you do need to be careful. You do need the independent expert voice, in my view, and you do need the improvement. And that improvement has to be from within the school, and it has to be supported in some way. And there are dimensions of that support, some of which include the feedback and developmental advice of the inspectorate, who have come in to look at what's happening, but then want to make suggestions about what should happen.
And do you think that body should be statutorily independent of the department?
Yes.
Okay.
How independent, how that independence can be maintained is tricky. Because it's, we have seen over time the HMI in England basically destroyed by the intervention of government and a very polarised school inspection process led by Ofsted. And I think That's not to denigrate Ofsted. They do lots of good work, but the actual fundamental relationship is too close to political whim.
Well, that's interesting. I even thought, it was funny that we held up Ofsted in here for being independent recently, and later that week, the head of Ofsted was sacked by the Minister of Education. It was quite funny, but no, just around even then, community engagement, and you made a very important point. I think that too often we see a school marked for closure, and then the community become involved, and by that stage it's too late. When looking at other examples internationally or anything else, is there examples, especially when you mentioned the better use of social media as well and around the inspection process and how the community can be tied in, are there examples we can be looking at to see how our community engagement works, what type of characteristic and dynamics we should be looking to foster in a school?
I wouldn't like to pick anyone out because fundamentally I wouldn't know them well enough. I'm a reader rather than a visitor of those places. But I genuinely would argue that we're not all that different. In fact, we have much to say that could be considered to be better. We're smaller, we're more in tune with our schools, we're able to develop a programme of inspection which is okay, it has its strains in terms of what you can manage with a small team, but it's integral. And if you take the the inspection process of France is much more robust and distant. The inspection process in Sweden is probably a bit more arm in arm. So it's, although there is an issue in Sweden about the statutory compliance of things that have to be done first and foremost. So there is that sort of audit inspection dimension there too. I would argue that, I wouldn't look to anywhere in particular for, I would look to places that haven't got inspection. I think it's worth looking to them. Although one exception might be Finland, where schooling is it's considered to be very good. But there are so many differences in the Finnish society that contributed to that. So my answer to you is I'm not sure.
Okay, no problem. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We've got masses of points and food for thought. One, we were touching on diagnostics, and I just wondered, was there any tests in particular that you felt were too diagnostic? Or
wrong person, Danny. Well, no, wrong person in the sense that I have no particular faith in the way diagnostic testing has been done, nor indeed the kinds of systems that are available. I think they have too many commercial interests in them. They are based on very, very dodgy educational principles. There's nobody knows a student better than their teacher, and only after having taught them. And I think that the more we rely on professional judgment, the better. Where you reach a ceiling is on the objectivity in relation to high stakes, and that's where you have to then draw in the examination, the objective examination. So that spectrum, we probably should spend a bit more time trying to augment the professional judgment of teachers, which is very good. You go into any teacher's class and ask them to rank, 1 to 30. And then give any kind of test you like, most likely that ranking and the scores will be 1 to 30, very, very similar to the teachers. So they really do know. They may not be able to articulate it, and you certainly don't want them in the kind of silliness I've seen over this last number of years, sitting down with a parent and saying, here's the graph of your students, and awful stuff. But you do want to create a culture where the professional judgment of the teacher is considered to be good and appropriate for a parent to hear, without all the graphs and numbers.
well, John, you've given us a massive good points to think about. I think I've learnt more today almost than many of the other presentations. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you. I mean, some of the things I say, I know are unpopular, perhaps in schools, but there is no magic bullet. It's all about a society improving all the time. Never mind schools.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you. So, members, I propose we go into closed session to consider the draft recommendations of the inquiry.
Okay.
Have we?
Closed. We just-
Summary.
I presume members.
So, correspondence is pages 188 to 326. We've 11 items provided under correspondence. And may I suggest dispose of the correspondence as per the covering sheet on pages 193 to 194. Sorry, just let me find them. Is there anyone wants to talk about? I just hadn't written a note. Just on nurture, on which was number 5. I wondered why we'd necessarily had to limit it to 20 schools, which seemed to be the cut-off.
It was just the amount of money that they had for the signature projects, I believe. There are a number of nurture units in existence, as you're aware, and so they augmented that list with some more. And I think that was just the amount of money that they had, and there was X number of children that they were going to support.
Okay, and then the next one was number 7, which was Drumra Integrated College. Is this one we need a sort of voluntary meeting?
Do you want to do that? Do you want to set something up?
Normally where we've had an individual school that's had something, we sometimes a committee.
Chairman, I appreciate it's an individual school, but the particular request they're making and the reason for it is quite important, because they don't need to explain it to you. They will be the only substantial school not on the Lissanelli campus if this goes ahead. And it just doesn't make any sense for an integrated school not to be on effectively an integrated campus, So I would strongly advocate that we should find some time for them. I think we do have time.
Okay. I was going to suggest that we then do it after the same way we've got Crumlin coming next week, which I'll go into in a second, immediately after this. That we were choosing, then we can talk, Chris.
I'm not aware my tablet has died battery-wise, but is there a legal issue around that particular school at the moment? That we won't subjudice or anything? There's no...
Well, yes, that's a fair point, yeah. There is a JR going on.
Yeah, I'm just worried that we may...
Okay, let's explore that.
The clerk will do that. Also, just for members' information, the outline business case for Lissanelli, I've just received that, so that will be in PACS next week. So this will be a juncture to talk about it again. So I'll hold on to that for now.
Not to discuss the legal case, but it doesn't relate to their
It's not the same.
proposed move to Lissanelli. No, it doesn't. No.
Yeah.
So you could, but investigate by all means.
Okay.
Do it next week.
We'll talk about it now. Okay.
Yep.
Anyone got any other bits of correspondence they want to respond to? Okay. If we can move on, forward work programme. The draft forward work programme is at pages 237 to 241. And you'll see that next week the meeting will be held in room 29 for our evidence session with the Chief Inspector, which will be our final inquiry briefing. You'll also see that the forward work programme has been populated to the end of the session, and we'll soon begin our further consideration of STEM issues as discussed in our formal strategic planning session. To inform this, is the committee content to commission Assembly Research to produce a paper on the revised curriculum and the Department of Education's freedom to promote subjects like STEM in the curriculum? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Are members content with the draft forward work programme with any agreed changes? Okay, agreed. Any other business? I have Crumlin, the school, the Crumlin Integrated. The parents, the pupils, and the governors are coming up next week, meet for 1 o'clock, and would like to present why they want a shared school there and various points. So I appreciate anyone who can to give them some time. And it'll be in room 277.
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. Okay. Members, we previously agreed to meet up in an informal session prior to receiving the final oral evidence from the Chief Inspector on the 12th of March. Are we content to meet informally at 10 o'clock on Wednesday the 12th in room 29? So we start off with an informal.
Yes, and then the evidence an hour later.
And then the evidence session with the Chief Inspector for 1 hour later. Are we happy with that?
Yeah,
Yep.
but we need members to be here for 10.
Okay. Okay. And again, apologise to James
James, we
for the
should-
second time. But thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members.